Hi, welcome to another episode of I Mustache You Something. I've got the fabulous, amazing, talented, motivated, empowered Angie Awad. Uh, I am proud to be a co-servant with her in the. It's not really Natick anymore. It's kind of like a
We're a
area.
conglomerate of
Yeah,
just
like, these
New
people that get
England-ish.
together who are sometimes in their late teens and early 20s and sometimes just pretending to be um, and it's been actually one of the highlights of COVID for me that instead of meeting in person for these college and graduate meetings, we've met virtually. We've meted. Not even Siam. If it was Siam, I could understand meet. Um, yeah, so we've been meeting virtually, which has invited Angie from Attleboro and Sandra from Nashua and other people from the area that otherwise wouldn't come to Natick for the college graduate meeting to be joining us. And you guys have become like real regulars and influencers in the meeting, which has been awesome. So Angie, um, tell me, because I asked about your brother. You have a younger brother named Philo, and you and your brother and your parents pray at Holy Family in Attleboro. But I don't know how long have you been in the area? Where'd you grow up?
So this is it's a little, it's not really complex, but so we originally were a Natick family, as was every single person in this area. And then around 2002, we moved to Canada. So I grew up in Burlington, Ontario, and we went to the Mississauga Church, which is a total powerhouse now. I absolutely love it. And then in 2008, we moved back, and we then were at the Karma for some time, and then Attleboro opened up, and it's a 15-minute drive from our house, so that's significantly easier than driving an hour every week.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So that's awesome. So you came back. How old were you when you came back to the Boston, Massachusetts area?
I was 11, I believe, 10 or 11.
Okay. So old enough to remember and old enough to think about what it was like, and
Mhm.
how was that transition in terms of your sort of Coptic community? Was it like similar? Was it different?
It was, I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't remember a lot of the like dynamics of when I was in Canada, because again, I was below 10 years old. I can't remember the nuances of the community and all of that,
Sure.
but um, I remember um, it being like I can only remember positives, which is, I think, a good thing if all you can remember is a positive experience.
It's the great thing about
Uh,
being a kid.
right, exactly. So comparatively, it was a little bit weird transitioning back to the Boston area, because there were people I grew up with, but I couldn't quite remember. Like uh, my parents would like bring me to someone's house and be like, "Here's Amo and Tant, say hi," and they know you, and I'm sitting there like, yeah, I don't know who you guys are, and then
Sure.
yeah, so kind of it was like working from the ground up when I came back, and kind of trying to reacquaint myself to the Coptic community here, and
How
yeah,
old were you when you left?
uh probably like 5 or 6 years old. Yeah,
You guys were in Canada for 5 years.
yeah, 5 or 6, depending. I can't remember exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah,
But yeah, long enough to forget everybody.
right.
But like,
I
but
yeah.
you're old enough when you left that like they remember you being like old enough, like you should remember me, and then they're offended that you don't remember. And you're like, I can pretend to remember you, no problem.
It's a lot of smiling and nodding. Yeah.
um, okay, and now you go. Actually, no, you graduated from Stonehill.
Mhm.
How long ago?
Um, oh my God, 2 years now. I graduated early, so December of 2018. And then, um, yeah, I'm technically class of 2019, but I have to overachieve, so got that
So,
extra semester.
so everybody that's listening knows exactly what you mean by why don't you just say it out loud? Why? Why do you have to overachieve?
Because I have high standards imposed by my parents.
Uh,
There we go.
uh,
No, but to be fair, like I used to really kind of um go along with that mentality of like, oh, my parents are making me, my parents are making me. But in hindsight, I have an appreciation for the standards that my parents uh kind of set for me. They made me driven and I of course, I got like a side of anxiety at the like with the experience, but ultimately, like I wouldn't be where I am now without that kind of mentality of keep pursuing the highest kind of goal that you can try and reach for.
so you've been successfully brainwashed.
Um, sure, let's go with that.
Because I think that something that we've talked about with several of the guests on whatever this is, show, podcast, mustache thing, um, is this idea of identity, right? And it's hard for us to kind of put a finger on where our identity comes from, right? And if you ask someone, if they value achievement, they're probably going to be able to tell you, right? There's enough insight there to say, yes, I do, or you know what, it's something I think is cool and I like when other people do it, but it's really not that important to me. But why? Why do you value achievement? It's hard, right? To really put a finger on, okay, well, it's 20% my dad and 36% my mom. And, I was in competition with my brother. So that added like another 22%. And then the rest is kind of me. And nobody knows, right? Like all we know is that we were pushed because we're Egyptian. And we complied because you know, we're not ready to die. Like we want to survive our first 18 years of life, and we want to continue to please our parents. So we keep going, and then at some point you look back and you go, I think I agree, but I don't know why. So I guess what that brings us to is, when do you feel like that shifted, right? When it was like, yes, at some point I would say, oh, my parents. And then eventually it's like, oh, no, it's me. At what point did that transition happen?
For me, it happened, I think, I can pinpoint this exactly. It was my spring semester of junior year, where I was prepping myself to go to med school because that was kind of,
You're
to
still
be
going
fair
through.
to my parents, that was never my parents' expectation. Like I was never brought up being told to go to med school. It was only when like I think junior year of high school, for some reason, I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna try med school. Like I brought it on myself. And then from there, once I introduced that idea, my parents were like, excellent idea, go on.
We've been
And then
subliminally trying to convince you of this for years. You finally caught on.
yeah, but like up until that point, I had never felt pressured to figure out like or the expectation of either becoming a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. It was never really put on me. Um, and then once I got to college, I went through the first 3.5 years and low-key hated a bit of my life. It was not having a great time. And I realized that it was because I was trying to kind of force myself to go down a path that wasn't right for me. And so I made that decision this semester before I graduated. And I was like, I don't want to go to med school. I don't feel like it's for me. And I know that I'm going to be miserable if I continue to pursue it. So from then on, I guess I kind of took everything that my parents taught me and kind of instilled in me. And I then started to push it in the direction that I wanted.
Mm.
So I was like, okay, these are the values that I have. These are the experiences that I have collected over the years. How do I take those and then put them towards a goal that I want, that calls to me? And I'm still figuring that out. And that's the beautiful part of being in your early 20s. It's just a lot of figuring things out. Um, but I think it was that point where, like, I remember I had a lot of long talks with my mom specifically, where she was like, I think you're just afraid that, it's your fear that's making you second guess. Just keep pushing. You'll be able to do fine in med school. Just keep pushing. And I had to tell her, I was like, this isn't what I want, this, and I know this now. And it took a little kind of convincing and cajoling, but eventually she was like, so long as you have a plan, just leave me alone. Just follow that plan. So now I'm applying to grad school for clinical psych, and I am excited to do that. Like, that is not, I'm not feeling any dread. And I'm anticipating positively the experience of going to grad school instead of fearfully dreading it and getting a lot of anxiety from it. So yeah.
So that's interesting. First of all, like, big A plus for your mom. Like, just the fact that, like, there wasn't like guilt and shame and like a we already told our relatives in Egypt, and like
That was another thing. That's a whole other thing.
like
We're
like
still trying to deal with that.
like once you say the D word, you're like, okay, like, you know, I don't like, come back with a diploma. I don't want to hear any of this. I changed my mind nonsense.
My mom will tell people I'm still going to be a doctor, just a different type. that's how we try and circumvent it.
Yeah, yeah. This is actually, yeah. This is actually um, the challenge, which is, there's always like a reinvention of what it means to be a doctor, because like, uh, uh, you know, at some point we have to say, like, okay, your doctorate in hot sauce is is really not going to be equally regarded. So it's okay. Like, nobody says that, like, there should be a value judgment that the doctor should be like bah, bah, bah. But it turns into a justification game,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the fact that you, again, huge kudos to your mom that she was able to at least engage in that dialogue and engage in that conversation with you, where like, oh, you have ideas too. Wow, that's great. But how did, I'm going to ask you two questions. The first one is, how did you get to that point where you were able to recognize and own the the this isn't what I want? And two, answer that first, and then I'll ask you a follow-up question, and maybe you'll just answer that second question in your first answer.
So truthfully,
Mm.
therapy. Because I, a lot of what I had kind of trained myself to do is that I would have a plan for the next 10 years. And if something deviated from that plan, it would make me spiral. And so obviously, once you get to college, that's not a great sustainable way to live. So I sought out mental health help, and working with a counselor, um, I started kind of forming a hypothetical toolbox of ways to deal with those kinds of thoughts. And so little by little, I became more okay with the ambiguity of the future. And I started to feel more comfortable not knowing exactly what was in store for myself. And so once I started kind of dealing with the fear of what is ahead of me, I started to be able to focus on what is in front of me now. And then I realized I wasn't that happy with what I was doing in that moment. So like through those 3.5 years, I was justifying the anxiety and the fear by saying, once you get past med school, you'll be fine. And so I was putting myself through torture to try and get to that goal, but I was losing a part of myself in the process. And so once I kind of, again, dealt with the fear of the future, I started focusing on the now and dealing with that, and being like, oh, I don't like this. And if I don't like this now, I'm not going to like the next 10 years. And I didn't want to put myself through that. So I had to kind of do a lot of soul searching, and kind of sit and think about what was important to me and what I wanted to do. And that kind of adjusted my next steps. So yeah.
So what kind of nudged you in that direction where you felt like that was an okay thing to do?
What do
To,
you
to
mean?
go to go to
Therapy?
therapy? Yeah, I mean
So
that, I mean, like that, you tell us where it came from and where it didn't kind of come
yeah,
from.
so I had been dealing with anxiety since, like, I mean, probably like late middle school into high school. And I didn't really deal with it until, like, it got really bad during my junior and senior year. And I remember I'd had a bad anxiety attack in front of a servant who is a mental health counselor. And she actually took me out on a drive, and we just talked for a little bit. And she was very candid with me. And she told me, listen, once you go to college, I think you need to take advantage of the free counseling services, and just talk to someone. And so that was the first thing that I did when I went to college. I sought out counseling services, I made an appointment. And from then on, for the next 3.5 years that I was at school, I regularly saw a counselor, and I recommend therapy to every person that I talk to, because it the person I am today is absolutely not the person that I was 4 years ago. Like I think if 4 years ago Angie saw me now, she would be very anxious just seeing what I'm doing now.
You don't have a plan? You don't, but you still have a highlighted spreadsheet of the different programs
I
that you've
do.
gone
I do.
through. And I don't just know that because you showed me a picture of it. I know that because that's what 10-year planners do. Not
Yes,
that I know
that's
personally.
I also have a highlighted planner with all my notes of what I need to be doing. And
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, you're a completely different person. Completely different.
well, I mean, at least now I don't spiral completely if something doesn't go right. It's
So
progress.
I'm actually thrilled and surprised that this was actually somebody from church.
Yes. Yeah.
That's not the norm, right?
Yeah. I see. I don't know if I would have taken her advice seriously back then if it was not someone from church. Like if it wasn't a servant that I had bonded with previously and felt comfortable around, I don't think I would have taken that advice quite as seriously as I did.
Hmm. So that's an interesting paradox in that people in our community are more likely to stigmatize and less likely to recommend therapy, right? There's there's often sometimes a disconnect between, what is spiritual and what is practical. So that, yes, we're a Sunday school program that focuses on the spiritual, and that comes, either in ignorance of or in opposition to things that are sort of just practical. So the paradox then becomes that this is the place where we feel most safe. This is the place where we feel most engaged. This is where we feel supported. This is where we feel like we can get the best possible advice, right? So if anyone's going to have this effect to be able to get someone to do the right thing and get professional help, and there's nothing that says like you do that instead of confession, you do that instead of communion, you do that instead of prayer, you do that instead of reading the Bible. Like all of the spiritual things and all of the gifts that we have in the church are great. They address our spirit, and they're healing to the body and to the soul, by the effect they have on the spirit. But I think it's impressive, and it's at least like when I was growing up, something that would have been very unlikely to happen. So
It's
that's really
actually,
awesome.
yeah, no, and I think part of that is what is inspiring me to go into the mental health field as well. Like even in my grad school apps, like when they ask you, why do you want to be in this program? What I have said is I want to be able to service my community better. And so I want to take what I learn in all my clinical psych classes and my experiences counseling and bring that back into the community, because we are most certainly an underserved community in that respect. So yeah.
Yeah. And the gift that you had from this servant is going to be a gift that hopefully you can pass along to other people, and then
God
those people
willing.
can give it to more people. That's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. um, so if there's someone listening right now that may or may not even know that they're struggling with depression, anxiety, or whatever it may be, a number of different things that are just as prevalent, if not more prevalent, in our community as they are in the general population, how can they first recognize that? And obviously, this is not something that you can speak to as from a place of expertise as a professional, but just as a congregant, as a member, as a fellow member of the body of Christ. How would you sort of say, hey, like, these might be some telltale signs that you should be considering, maybe looking at getting some advice from a professional?
Of course, I can only speak from personal experience, but what kind of tipped me off is the way that I placed the idea of the how do I word this? So like I placed more of an importance on how other people perceived me than how I perceived myself. So I um let's call it trying to be like a social chameleon. Like I tried to adjust who I was based on who I was around, and I got a lot of anxiety surrounding like, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? How am I looking to these people? Like it got to a point where like in a social setting, I would be afraid to say anything. And so like that's not a great place to be in if you are placing more of an importance on how other people are perceiving you than how you value yourself. Like if your value depends on another person, that's when you should maybe start thinking about, okay, why do I value this person's opinion on who I am more than the value that I put on myself, so um trying to think of other things like are you looking for like behaviors or like
I'm also going to be talking to Mary, my wife, who you know is a clinical therapist.
Mhm.
I'm actually, she doesn't know this, but I'm going to be posting her video, like when we, um, you know, do the mustache thing, on her birthday. So
Oh,
yeah, so
she's gonna love that.
she's gonna love it. And the only reason I'm telling you this now is because I know she's not going to watch this, so it's not going to spoil any surprise.
Should I be offended?
No, no, I
Oh,
should.
she's not. Okay.
No, no, it has
No, but
nothing.
I would hope that she would tune in because it's me. But I
That was
guess
actually so. Before I mentioned it, that was like the one thing I was like, what if she watches just because of Angie? Like, no, no, she's gonna get like 7 minutes into it and be like, I'm sick of the sound of Mina's voice. I'm not watching this.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah,
I'm sick of your voice.
imagine 24/7. This poor lady. Um, so yeah, so I will be talking to her to kind of get like sort of like the clinical expert
She
perspective.
would be a greater
Yeah.
source
No,
for that.
and I'm not asking because you're going to be like the only resource and like, this video is going to be the screening for, no, not at all. But I think I'm already intrigued in that you didn't start with an answer that is, this is how I felt, right? You think that like an answer to when should I get help, right? When should I seek therapy? When should I, is something that is related to something that's going inside of me, right? And I feel this way, or I can't do this, or I can't function, or I don't leave the house, or any like sort of extreme things. But I thought it was really interesting that your answer was how I relate to other people was affected,
Mhm.
and what I expect from others, and what others I think they expect of me, right? That's an interesting answer, and I'll probably ask Mary about it. Um, not even like on the interview, but like I'll be like, "Hey, listen, I was talking to Angie," and it's an interesting perspective in that it's not debilitating. It's not like you're having this like paralyzing anxiety or like paralyzing depression where you weren't functional. No, like you just felt what would be called an incongruence, right? You didn't feel like you were aligned, right? You weren't congruent from one day to the next. Like you were this group a certain way, you were that group, and that inconsistency was something that you noticed more so than how that inconsistency made you feel.
Mhm.
So it's interesting. Like I think that's a very objective thing, and I think
Mhm.
it came up with Robbie Aziz, who I also had a conversation with, and he and I talk about this all the time. Like there are certain things that are expected of you to be part of our Coptic community, and there's like this Coptic bubble that we wrap ourselves in, and like you're either in or you're out, and if you're in, this is what you do, and if you're out, we gave you the option to be in under these conditions.
Mhm.
And sometimes some of these things don't really jive with it, right? They don't really make sense to everyone. So
Mhm.
it's making a lot of sense to me. So no, don't worry. Like nobody's relying on me, definitely, and by extension on you to figure out why they need therapy. But that's a really interesting answer that you offer.
Mhm.
And anything else that you think would be helpful to people that would help them sort of flag certain.
Yeah, kind of within the same vein of the way that you perceive others and how you think that they perceive you is when you begin, when your thoughts become kind of self-sabotaging. Um, I experienced a lot of like, if a social interaction didn't go as well as I had hoped for, or like, I had anticipated it to go, I would spend the next 3 to 4 days just being like, oh, that was so dumb of you, like that was so stupid, like all these negative adjectives would be kind of turned inwards, and that had a really big impact again on how I valued myself and how I saw myself. And it took a lot of kind of deprogramming to
Mm.
kind of go in and be like, hey, that's it's just one social interaction. This doesn't define who you are as a person. This one interaction doesn't define who you are and the value that you have. Like a lot of so I think Mary will probably speak more to this, but I did CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which the whole basis of is like identifying the thoughts and um, knowing that a thought will have an impact on your behavior and your behavior will have an impact on your actions, and it's this cycle. So the point is to try and target the thoughts before they become behaviors.
Mm.
So it's kind of like catching negative thoughts before they have a real impact. So you're trying to like the way that my counselor framed it is that by nature I'm a very kind of analytical, uh, rational person, but I was having this kind of dissonance between the emotional side of myself that would kind of um, take one event and then snowball it into this bigger event that then kind of I would conflate to having um, like if it didn't go right, then I would conflate it to it being like a fault of my character, if
Mm.
that makes sense. So there, that was the emotional response, and so she helped me, quote unquote, train my more rational side to be like, okay, you need to kind of slam on the brakes there, and you need to think about this a little more rationally. So now, if I have a bad or weird interaction, and my mind immediately kind of jumps, it's like, oh, that was really that was kind of weird of you to do that. I kind of am more able to be like, okay, you know what? It's fine. No, who cares?
Yeah,
Everyone has weird interactions. It's all right.
right.
It's not a big deal. Like, no, that
Everyone
person's not
except
going to
me.
think
Yeah.
about it.
But, everyone but me, right? I never have any
Yeah, of
awkward,
course.
painful.
There's not one that I can think of. No.
Never. You actually mentioned that um, generalizing and catastrophizing, you
Yeah.
know, um, concept that Uncle Ahmed, who actually just finished his master's in therapy after a full career as a pediatric cardiothoracic anesthesiologist. It's actually really, I didn't want to call him out on it in the interview, but this is like the cutest thing in the world. He um, was in Cleveland working as a pediatric cardiothoracic anesthesiologist. So like, Cleveland Clinic is like the world famous heart hospital. So that's where he developed his reputation. And then he was recruited to be the chair of anesthesia at Texas Children's Hospital. And um, it was obviously tough for his family and tough for his wife. Like they had like a very like strong social circle in Cleveland. So he ended up doing a master's degree in counseling because she had already done a master's degree in counseling and he wanted to do it so that they had something in common and that they could work together. I was like, you're a good
So
guy.
cute.
That's why your wife likes you. I think
And here
like
you are getting a master's of theological studies.
like if I mention anything from class, anything, Mary goes, that's interesting. Yeah, go get a drink of
I love
water.
it.
So yeah, so that catastrophizing and um, generalizing is something that he mentioned. So it's interesting that you mention it also. Um, And the other thing that I think is interesting, and I don't know if you were around when we did the series on John Cashin and the thoughts. You weren't there for that. Okay. So basically, I think just before COVID, we had just finished a series on the 8 thoughts of John Cashin. And what's interesting is that um, the patristic fathers and mothers, the theologians of the 4th and 5th centuries, were kind of like the original psychologists. They were the ones that kind of looked into people's souls and tried to figure out, like, what's happening here? And, you know, psychology comes from the Greek psyche, right? Which is the soul. Right? So peering into the soul and trying to understand the soul is something that is not a modern practice. And he identified 8 thoughts, which are sex, food, anger, dejection. I'm going to blank on the rest, but you know, pride, vainglory, and all of these things, if they materialize into bad behaviors, they become vice, they become sin. Mm-hmm. But if we can catch these thoughts, like you were saying, we can short circuit the negative effects that could come. And all of these things are not necessarily inherently bad. They're just potential distractions from prayer, right? You know, either prayer being like an action that we do or a life that we live. So, you know, it goes back again to this. There's no competition between your therapy and your faith, right? There's no competition between what you did in therapy and what you did in confession. The work that you did, you know, in meditation and in silence and in personal reflection versus the work that you did, you know, in things that are your classic prayer life, like your Bible reading. Mm-hmm. So it's remarkable, again, to hear you and like think about like the relationality and how you identified these things and how you work through them. And these are all, you know, super Christian theological concepts that are sort of being lived out. Cool. So I guess as we wind down here, this is the point where, you know, people would be disappointed unless I mustache you something. And I would say that the pressing question that we have left is, what if somebody doesn't have that servant, right? What if they don't have someone, right? And, you know, maybe they don't even get a chance to listen to this and be encouraged by you, right? Maybe it's a friend of a friend. You know, how do we make it so that it's more destigmatized and how it can be more normalized in our community, that like we don't just have anxious, depressed, sad, obsessive people walking around that don't know that they have these issues and that they can be addressed, maybe not, you know, eliminated, but treated and made more functional.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do until, I mean, obviously once you get your degree, like that's
it'll be solved. Absolutely.
Stamp out mental health problems everywhere, like universal Coptic community.
Solved it. Yeah.
But until then, like in the next couple of years, while we're still waiting.
Yeah, my degree is going to take about 6 years, 7 years, depending. So it's going to take a while
before you're done.
Right. It's definitely a loaded question, and like being able to seek out mental health help is 100% a privilege. That first of all, that you're made aware of it, and that you have access to it. In terms of like how we even go about beginning to destigmatize mental illness in our community, I am hopeful because I've seen it begin to happen with the younger generations, that people are talking more about it, that it's not this really kind of hush hush kind of don't talk about it taboo thing. Although there's still this kind of weird dynamic between kids who are experiencing mental health issues and their parents who may be experiencing some issues too, but that they are like, no, you should just pray about it. You know, there's, again, as we said before, there's no issue with praying about it, but you kind of also need a kind of like a booster shot, you know, you kind of need an extra edge that therapy can provide, that they're not mutually exclusive. You can have them be offered at the same time, and that will kind of uh, form a more rounded um, experience for well-being. We actually kind of discussed this a little bit a couple of months ago when we talked about community engagement during one of our college talks, how change in our culture kind of follows this ecological model where it begins interpersonally and then intrapersonally and then community-wide and then culturally, societally, blah, blah, blah. So it kind of, this kind of change, this kind of destigmatization, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years and years and years, because we have to kind of unravel years and years and years of trauma and not dealing with it. So I think that if you are someone who is privileged enough to be aware of these issues and to have gotten help for them, that being that kind of voice of advocacy and kind of urging your peers to maybe talk about it more and offer more programs to discuss mental health, get in experts to talk to the community. Little by little, I think we would be able to normalize the idea that people experience mental health issues, and then start to kind of work towards ways to combat those issues and promote a healthier community and partake in each other's well-being.
Well said. Well said. I think one of the things that you started to say is that it's already starting to shift.
Yeah.
Right? So taking that both as encouragement to say, okay, let's keep going, but not consider it to be done.
Right. Absolutely. Like the when I say people are starting to talk about it, I think more people are more comfortable to talk about their anxiety and depression. But the way that the younger generation tends to do it is through jokes and not taking it really seriously, you know? So if it's great that we're talking about it, it's no longer
one of the younger generation then, right?
No, it doesn't. You need to stop that. No. You can dream. It's not, we'll talk about it later. We'll talk about it when we stop recording. But yeah, like it's more through jokes and not taking it seriously. So if we can kind of take that readiness to talk about those issues and kind of shift it slightly to taking it a little more seriously and promoting ways to actively deal with it, I think that we can kind of make a more substantive and kind of lasting change.
I love it. So I think most people I have to summarize at the end, but you have been pointed and clear and delightful as always.
Thank you.
I think what you just said, I think is a great wrap up. Any lasting parting words that you want to share with our 3 or 4 listeners?
All I can really say is like really keep an eye out for people who support you and kind of don't be afraid to ask for help when you are having a hard time, because I know that uh, us Copts tend to kind of take suffering in stride, you know. So it's not a bad thing to ask for help, and our job as one body is to support one another. And if one organ is failing, the rest of the body's not going to be having a great time. So we need to band together and support each other and lift each other up. So don't be afraid to seek out help.
Amen. Thank you, Angie. It's a
Thank
pleasure as
you.
always. And thank you, whoever happens to be listening. Bye, guys.